Alrighty, Bryn. Ready for another chapter? Chapter 4. The Mysterious River. "The stairs are just over there," Penny said in a whisper. She didn't know why she was whispering, but it seemed appropriate. "Everybody touch hands now," she said. "I'll carry Yuki under my arm so that he won't get lost. Patsy behind me, then Peter, then Pam at the rear." In the shaft of pale light cast by the opening in the playhouse above, the children could see that they were in a sort of cave. Directly ahead of them and leading downward were the stairs that Penny had found. They certainly weren't much, nothing more than crude steps dug out of the clay and sand. And so they started down, a step at a time, Penny in the lead. She was not frightened anymore. She felt instead a kind of thrill at leading a real expedition into the bowels of the earth. One moment. The bowels of the earth, a phrase she had picked up from reading Lucy Lawless, Girl Sandhog. For the first time in her life, she was completely on her own, with lives perhaps depending upon her. It steadied her, and she felt herself almost growing taller as a result of it. She put one foot very carefully after each step to make sure that there was another. The little tunnel down which the steps led in a gentle incline was quite narrow, and the sides were wet and slippery. Long roots poked through them, and Penny realized that they must be the tap roots of trees growing in the world above. Here's a photo. Indeed, there were roots everywhere, some like long wriggling snakes, slender and sinuous, others like short, fat sausages with small bulbets on the end, some intertwined like spaghetti or matted and woven together like fishnets, some like thin white worms coiling this way and that, and others as thick as a man's wrist branching down through the roof like inverted trees, continuing into the very floor of the tunnel down which the children were clambering. It was as if they were advancing deep into a ghostly and sunless forest. And that is what it was, of course. The underside of the forest above, which few people ever see. Patsy, who could count to 100 and was proud of it, was counting the steps. She had reached 73 when suddenly, down ahead of them, Penny became aware of a kind of glow. "There's something ahead," she called back to Pamela. "Everybody stop." Peter took one of the little cars out of his pocket and began to run it along the side of the tunnel. He said, "I am a bulldozer breaking up the ground." "Be quiet, Peter," Penny said in a sharp whisper. "We don't know what's below. Now everybody listen. We must move very quiet and carefully. There might be somebody or something below that wants to hurt us. We mustn't let them know we're here. No more counting, Patsy. And Pete, you put the car away." They moved on down toward the pale glowing light, sliding soundlessly over the soft clay steps. The tunnel began to widen out, and suddenly there was no more steps and no more tunnel. The children stood for a moment in the silence, awed by what they saw. They seemed to be in an enormous cavern, so huge that they could not see the far side, and so high they could scarcely see the roof. Through the cavern wound a river, like a bright, shimmering serpent. It glowed and sparkled, and its glow was reflected in hundreds of pinpoints of light from the crystal rocks all around. It was the river itself that seemed to supply the soft light, a sort of twilight to which the children quickly grew accustomed. After a few moments, they were easily able to pick out the various objects in the cavern, the shapes of the boulders on the far side of the river, the dark walls that rose above them, the icicles, as Patsy called them, which hung from the ceiling, flashing and glittering in the reflected glow of the river. "Oh," said Pamela, clapping her hands in delight, "it's so pretty!" And, indeed, it was. Beautiful, strange, and mysterious. Patsy rushed to the edge of the river, and Penny caught her just in time. The trick of the moment, she knew, was to try to keep Patsy from falling in. Patsy seldom got within hailing distance of a river or lake, pond or puddle without falling in. "What should we do now?" Pamela asked. "Well, there's no sign of the pollywog, or anybody else for that matter." "We'll have to explore a way along the river bank, I guess," Penny said. "Yes, but which way? Up or down?" Penny thought hard about that one. "I know," Pamela said. "Some of us could go one way and some the other." The idea of separating into groups did not appeal to Penny. "We could take off the dress-up clothes and pile them here," Pamela said. "It's awfully hot anyway. Then Pete and I could walk 500 steps down the river, and you and Patsy 500 steps the other way. If we find anything, we bark like Pollywog does. If we don't, we come back here and meet." It seemed logical enough, and Penny agreed. And so they shed their dress-up clothes and headed out in couples, in their shorts or jeans and t-shirts. Penny was glad now that Pamela was along. Her calmness and logic helped to steady her. Privately, she decided that Pam could have half of the playhouse when they returned. Penny had barely gone 300 steps up the river when she heard Pamela bark. Yukon King bristled at the sound, and Penny let him down. She and Patsy ran after him and quickly caught up with Pamela and Peter. Pamela was holding up a shoe. "It's Polly's," she said. "You know how he's always trying to get them off. He hates shoes." "Then it's settled," Penny said. "We have to go in this direction down the river." "What about the dress-up clothes?" Patsy asked. "We'll leave them there," Penny said firmly. "They'd only be an encumbrance." She rolled the big word around her tongue, proud of having used it correctly. They set off again, following the bank of the gently flowing river. "Look, what's that?" said Pamela, pointing out into the water. "Where?" "There, that thing. It looks like a pipe." "It is a pipe," said Peter, and it certainly seemed to be a thin metal pipe coming down from the high ceiling of the glowing cavern and down to the river. "It's just like the pipes our taps are on," Patsy said. "Oh, Patsy, you figured it out. It must be the well. Father always said that we must get our water from an underground river or lake or something." "Then we're right under the well," said Penny, marveling. "So at least we know where we are. Sort of. Come on, we've got to find Polly." They trudged on for several minutes, but then they came up hard against a stone wall. This is the limit of the great cavern. The river now entered a dark tunnel. "Whatever are we going to do now?" asked Penny. "Build a boat," said Peter, the practical. "We can't. There isn't a stick of wood or anything else that I can see." "Here's something," said Peter, reaching down. He picked up a small toy boat made of wood. The paint faded and the hull was chipped. "Why, it's my little sailboat," he said. "The one I lost." Now that's strange, Penny thought. How could that have got down here? "Somebody's been playing with my sailboat," Peter muttered, "and they've broken the mast." It was with this exact moment that Patsy, true to form, fell in with a splash. She was up in a moment, swimming like an eel, but for the wrong side, having lost her bearings in the plunge. Patsy had been the first of the children to learn to swim, just as she was the first in many things that required agility. Most important of all, she had been the first to learn to cross her eyes, a feat which is greatly admired by the others, but which sometimes unnerved old gentlemen. They would pat the child on the head and remark on her large, beautiful brown eyes, whereupon Patsy would look up with an angelic face, cross both her eyes so that they almost vanished into the bridge of her nose. It usually upset people when she did this, but then Patsy rather enjoyed upsetting people. Falling into rivers, of course, held no terrors for her. It happened almost daily. She swam across and hauled herself up, dripping onto the far bank. She looked around for the others, and not finding them, burst into tears. "Over here, silly!" Penny shouted at her. "You went the wrong way." Patsy stopped crying as quickly as she'd begun, jumped back into the water, and proceeded to swim towards the children. Halfway across, she stopped swimming and stood up. "Why, the water only comes up to her waist," said Penny. "I see a little light," Patsy chirped at her. "Where, Patsy?" "In the tunnel, way down the river." "Come on," Penny said. "I believe we can all wade. Pam, you had better carry Yukon King." But Yukon King had already plunged into the water and was swimming strongly toward Patsy. "Make a human chain," Penny said as she reached Patsy. "Now everybody hold hands and we'll walk down the river together through the tunnel. It's really quite warm, isn't it?" And it was. Quite warm and pleasant. The water glowed all around them, and Penny noticed that when it rolled off of them, each drop seemed to glitter briefly. Thus, they entered the tunnel at the end of which could be seen a pinpoint of light, just as Patsy had reported. But they were scarcely in the tunnel before a weird and hollow cry far off in the distance echoed up toward them. "There's something in the tunnel," Pamela whispered. "It's a ghost," said Peter. The children stopped and clung together. The sound stopped and then began again. It sounded something like "Ugh," repeated over and over. "I don't want to go," said Patsy, looking as if she were going to burst into tears once more. "Be quiet," whispered Penny, "and listen." She could feel her own heart pounding and her knees knocking together, but she had no intention of turning back. The pollywog was her responsibility, and he must be found. She listened for the sound, and it came again in waves, echoing off the walls of the dark tunnel. "Ugh, ugh, 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 ugh." "It sounds like a lot of people talking," said Pamela. "You know, like they're in another room." "There must be someone at the far end of the tunnel," Penny whispered. "Maybe they've got Polly," Peter said, pushing his newly found boat around in the water, making small tooting noises under his breath. "Shh!" Penny cautioned him. She listened again, but now the great tunnel was absolutely quiet. She gripped Patsy tightly by one arm to prevent her from turning back in panic, and then began moving cautiously forward again. "Stick close to the wall, everybody," she whispered, and the children, up to their waists in water, crept forward. As they moved on, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel growing larger and larger and brighter. The softly flowing waters rushed past them, moving in the same direction. Pamela, who noticed almost everything and whose large eyes had been peering solemnly about, now saw that a narrow ledge about the width of one person ran along the side of the tunnel and just above the surface of the water. She climbed onto it at once, and the others followed her, creeping forward in single file. "Something touched me," said Peter. Penny put her hand quickly over Patsy's mouth to stop her from screaming at the top of her voice when she had no reason to. When she was frightened, she really screamed, and she was frightened now. "It's trying to steal my boat," cried Peter, outraged. Penny's eyes widened. In the gloom, she saw a small green arm had come out of the water and seized Peter's boat. "Give me my boat," said Peter, hitting at something under the water. He disliked it very much when other children tried to take his toys by force. This wasn't exactly a child, perhaps. He didn't know what it was, but the principle was the same. "Grab it, Pam," cried Penny, letting go of Patsy and making a dive at the green arm. She caught something slithery and hung on. Peter was still punching away with his small fists, and Pamela was now helping as best as she could. Behind her, Penny could hear Patsy start to scream. The three of them managed to haul from the water a small green-colored person with large floppy ears, great staring eyes, and a sharp nose. He had no hair to speak of and wasn't much more than 2 feet high. In spite of his size, he was terribly strong. It took 3 of them to hold him, and even then it was a struggle. The little man rolled his eyes horribly and bared his sharp lizard-like teeth as he thrashed about in their grip. Most lizards don't have teeth, I'm pretty sure. "Shouldn't steal toys," said Peter in a grieved voice, trying to wedge the boat out of the green man's hand. But the little man clung to it with a steady grip. "I guess you can play with it for a while," Peter said, "but give it back after." There's a photo. No Yukon King in this photo. The little man hissed at him like a kitten caught in a corner. "Oh, do shut up, Peter," said Penny. "Can't you see he's scared?" "I'm scared too," said Patsy, who had stopped screaming. "What's your name?" Peter asked curiously. "I am Peter," he added amiably, for he was not a boy who could hold a grudge for long. "Og," said the green man. "Hi, Og," said Peter. "Never mind names," said Penny, more grimly. She poked the little green man in his stomach. "What have you done with my little brother?" The little person stared at her balefully. "Og?" it asked. "You've stolen our baby brother. Don't try to deny it," Penny said, tightening her grip on his arm and poking him again. "Where is he? We want him back." "It's my turn to play with the boat, Og," Peter said, reaching for the toy. "Og," said the little green man suddenly. "Og, og, 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 og." He clung fiercely to the boat. "I believe the only word he knows is og," said Pamela slowly. "Maybe he's not growed yet," said Peter. "Maybe they only have one word," said Pamela, thinking about it to herself. "Silly," said Peter. "Who ever heard of just one word?" "We aren't getting anywhere," said Penny, "and we've made an awful lot of noise. Unless we think of a plan, we're going to be in trouble." "What about Og?" said Pamela. "He's not much use with one word," said Penny. "What do we do with him?" "Tie him up," said Penny, coming to a quick decision. "We can't take him with us. We can't let him escape to warn others like him. Here, Peter, Give me that string of yours." And with Pamela's help, she turned the protesting Og over on his stomach, and then pushing his legs behind him and pinning his arms back around them, she neatly tied his thumbs together. The method had been carefully explained with diagrams in a clever book called 100 Things a Child Can Do on a Rainy Afternoon. She and Pamela had known it would come in handy sometime, and they practiced it many times on whichever one of the terrible twins they could catch and hold down long enough. Would you like to see the picture? Poor Og. "Now," said Penny, "here's what we'll do first. I will sneak forward along the ledge of the tunnel and have a look. The rest of you stay here and wait until I get back. Pamela, you're in charge. Keep Patsy quiet and make sure Og doesn't wriggle free." The green man, lying helpless on his stomach, was slithering about on the ledge, muttering to himself over and over in a small, tortured voice. Peter had to keep pushing him back against the wall to prevent him falling into the water. "Be careful, Penny," whispered Pamela, and she squeezed her older sister's hand, something she had very rarely done before in her life. Penny squeezed back and then began to move stealthily forward, half crouching as she went. Pamela watched as her thin figure, silhouetted against the light at the end of the tunnel, became smaller and smaller, and then at last vanished into the gloom, into the unknown. She and Peter and Patsy sat on the edge of the ledge, dangling their feet in the water, and settled down to wait. They waited and waited and waited, but there was no sign and no word from Penny. She did not come and she did not call, and now the silence in the great gloomy tunnel was oppressive, for there was no human sound at all, only the whisper of the breeze whistling down the long tunnel, only the sighing of the luminous river as it slipped past the dark roots. And that's the end of chapter 4. Here are the waiting children. Hope you're having a good day. See you later.